I remember the taste of counterseptic on the transport ship that brought us to our first deployment. Bitter. Chemical. It coated the inside of my mouth for 3 days straight because we were required to rinse with it every 6 hours to prevent infection in the close quarters. 27 of us crammed into a troop compartment designed for 20. The air recyclers hummed at a frequency that made my teeth ache. 53 hours from embarkation to planetfall. I was 19 years old. My father had been a stormtrooper, died on a world I cannot pronounce. My mother received notification when I was 7. Standard form, expression of gratitude for his service. No details about how he died. The Munitorum does not waste resources on specifics. She kept the notification in a drawer beside the stove. Sometimes I would see her looking at it while cooking rations. She never cried. When I was conscripted at 17, she nodded once and said the Emperor required service. That was all. The Schola Progenium processed me efficiently. Physical conditioning, weapon proficiency, tactical doctrine. 18 months of training compressed into every waking hour. They taught us to shoot, to move, to kill without hesitation. They taught us that stormtroopers were elite, better equipped than guard infantry, better trained, higher survival rates. The instructors said this frequently. Higher survival rates. I believed them. My first squad was designated Tempest 7. Sergeant Harkin commanded. He had served 14 years. Gray at the temples. Scar tissue across his left cheek where shrapnel had removed the flesh years before. He looked at us during our first briefing and said we would learn quickly or die quickly. Those were the options. No middle ground. The other squad members introduced themselves with names I tried to memorize. Corvin, Militant, Drace, Kellen, others. I remember Corvin most clearly. He was the heavy weapons specialist, carried a melter gun that weighed 18 kilograms. He had hands like machinery parts, thick fingers, calluses on his palms from the weapon's grip. When he spoke, his voice was quiet. He told me during our second day that most stormtroopers died in their first engagement. Not all. Most. He said this the way you might comment on weather patterns. Factual observation, without judgment. I asked him how long he had served. 3 years, he said. 47 combat drops. He was 22 years old. Our deployment was to a hive world designated Crucian Tertius. Heretic uprising. Local PDF overwhelmed. 3 stormtrooper squads assigned to eliminate high-value targets in the upper spire sections. Our objective was a communications relay that coordinated heretic forces across 17 hive sectors. Command estimated light resistance. Intelligence suggested the heretics lacked heavy weapons or organized defense. Intelligence was incorrect. We inserted via gravtute at midnight local time, 1,700 meters above the target structure. The descent took 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I counted. The wind at that altitude was strong enough to make the chute harness cut into my shoulders despite the padding. Below, the hive glowed with hablight and industrial fire. Billions of people living in structures that rose kilometers into toxic atmosphere. I could smell the pollution even through my rebreather. Promethium, waste, decay. We landed on a platform 300 meters from the relay structure. The squad assembled without verbal communication. Hand signals. Practiced movement. We advanced through the spire section using routes Sergeant Harkin had memorized from orbital reconnaissance data. The architecture was ancient. Pre-imperial construction, possibly. The walls were ferrocrete, cracked and stained. Graffiti marked every surface. Heretical symbols I had been trained to recognize. We encountered the first hostiles 60 meters from our objective. 3 sentries, poorly equipped. Autogun rifles, no armor. Sergeant Harkin designated targets via Vox. 3 lasguns fired simultaneously. The sentries fell. We continued advancing. The communications relay was housed in a structure that had been a worship hall once. The heretics had converted it into a command center. We breached through a service entrance, placed demolition charges on the primary door. The explosion was precise, controlled. We entered through the smoke, 17 hostiles inside, maybe more. The engagement lasted 90 seconds. We killed them methodically. Room clearing procedure exactly as trained. I fired my hell gun 23 times. Hit 19 targets, 4 misses. Acceptable performance for first combat. Sergeant Harkin said so afterward. Acceptable. We rigged the relay equipment with melter charges. Set timer for 6 minutes. Extracted through the same breach point, we were 80 meters away when the charges detonated. The structure collapsed. Mission accomplished. 0 friendly casualties. Command transmitted commendation. Tempest 7 had performed with distinction. We returned to the transport ship. Debriefing lasted 40 minutes. Then we waited for the next assignment. That was the first mission. Everything afterward was variation on the same pattern. Insert, eliminate, extract, repeat. We conducted 17 operations over 6 months. Lost 2 squad members during that period. 1 to sniper fire. 1 to a booby trap that detonated while he was clearing a corridor. We received replacements within a week. New troopers. Young, frightened, but hiding it behind discipline. They learned quickly or they died. Those were still the options. Corvin became the person I spoke with most frequently. Not friendship. Stormtroopers do not form friendships. Attachment reduces efficiency. But we worked together often. I carried extra power packs for his melter gun. He covered my advances during room clearing. We developed synchronization. Tactical partnership. He told me during our 11th mission that I was competent. Coming from him, that was significant praise. Sergeant Harkin led us through those 6 months with mechanical precision. He never raised his voice, never showed emotion during combat. He made decisions quickly, and the decisions were usually correct. When they were incorrect and someone died because of it, he logged the casualty and continued functioning. I tried to emulate this. Process rather than feel. Observe rather than react. The 18th mission broke everything. We deployed to a forge world. Designated target was a corrupted Mechanicus facility where Hertic elements were manufacturing weapons for traitor forces. Intelligence indicated moderate resistance. 2 stormtrooper squads assigned. Tempest 7 and Tempest 3. Combined operation. Surgical strike against the facility's reactor core. Destroy the reactor. Eliminate the manufacturing capability. We inserted via Valkyrie gunship at dawn. The Forge world's atmosphere was thick with industrial particulate. Visibility was perhaps 50 meters. The gunship landed us on the facility's southern perimeter. We disembarked and advanced through the outer defensive structures. The resistance was heavier than intelligence had indicated. Skitarii defenders, combat servitors, automated defense systems. We engaged them systematically. The fighting was intense but manageable. We pushed through the outer perimeter, breached the secondary walls, advanced toward the reactor core structure. Tempest 3 reached the reactor first. We were 60 seconds behind them. I heard their vox chatter. Charges placed. Preparing for detonation. They sounded calm, professional, everything proceeding according to tactical doctrine. Then something went wrong. The vox filled with static and shouting. Tempest 3's sergeant transmitted emergency contact report. Unknown hostiles, heavy weapons, requesting immediate support. His transmission cut off mid-sentence. Sergeant Harkin ordered double-time advance. We ran toward Tempest 3's position. The sound of gunfire was continuous. Explosions. Screaming. We arrived at the reactor chamber 37 seconds after the initial contact report. Tempest 3 was gone. All 8 members. Dead. Torn apart. The hostiles were still there. I saw them clearly. Chaos Space Marines. 3 of them. Traitor Astartes in corrupted power armor. They had killed Tempest 3 in less than a minute. Now they turned toward us. We engaged immediately. 9 stormtroopers against 3 Chaos Space Marines. The mathematics were unfavorable. Hellguns against ceramite armor. We might as well have been throwing stones. Sergeant Harkin ordered focus fire on the nearest Marine. All weapons, concentrated volleys, we fired in disciplined bursts. The Hellgun last bolts splashed against the traitor's armor, scorching the ceramite, damaging but not penetrating. The Marine advanced through our fire, raised his bolter, fired. Kellen died. The bolt round hit him in the chest, detonated. His torso separated from his legs. The biological matter that had been a person scattered across the chamber floor. Corvin stepped forward, aimed his melter gun, fired at point-blank range. The superheated beam struck the Chaos Marine's breastplate, melted through, punched into the creature's body. It staggered, fell, dead. The other 2 Marines killed Corvin 3 seconds later. Bolter fire from 2 directions. His body disintegrated under the impacts. The melter gun fell from his hands, clattered on the deck plating. Still functional, still hot from discharge. I picked it up. I do not remember deciding to do this. I simply observed myself moving, gripping the weapon. Corvin's blood was still wet on the grip. The melter gun was heavier than I expected, 18 kilograms. I raised it, aimed at the second Chaos Marine, fired. The beam struck the Marine's helmet, melted through the eye lens. The creature's head exploded from internal pressure as its brain boiled. It collapsed. The 3rd Marine killed Sergeant Harkin, then Drace, then Militant, then everyone else whose names I should remember but cannot recall clearly now. The chamber filled with bodies and blood and the smell of burned flesh and ceramite. I fired the melter gun until the power pack exhausted. 4 shots total. The 3rd Marine's armor was heavily damaged, but the creature was still advancing. It raised its bolter, aimed at me. I waited for death. The demolition charges Tempest 3 had placed on the reactor detonated. I do not know why they detonated. Perhaps timer malfunction. Perhaps one of Tempest 3's dead had managed to trigger them before dying. The explosion was enormous. The reactor went critical. The entire facility began collapsing. I ran. Pure survival instinct. No thought. No planning. I dropped the melter gun and ran through corridors that were disintegrating around me. The Forge world's structure was failing. Walls collapsed. Floors buckled. I kept running. I do not remember reaching the extraction point. I remember the Valkyrie pilot shouting through the Vox. I remember hands pulling me aboard. I remember looking back at the facility as we lifted off. The entire structure was collapsing into itself, flame and smoke rising kilometers into the poisoned atmosphere. Tempest 7 was gone. All of them. Sergeant Harkin, Corvin, Kellen, Drace. Everyone. I was the only survivor. The transport ship's Medicae examined me during the return flight. Minor injuries, contusions, first-degree burns on my hands from the melter gun's discharge heat. Nothing requiring significant treatment. Physically, I was functional. They debriefed me for 6 hours. I reported everything I remembered. The engagement sequence, the Chaos Space Marine presence, the casualty count, 2 stormtrooper squads, 17 elite troopers, 0 survivors except me. Mission objective achieved. Facility destroyed. Acceptable losses, they said. Stormtrooper operations have acceptable casualty rates. This is known. They asked why I survived. I told them I did not know. They asked if I had tactical insights that might improve future operational doctrine. I told them the enemy had been Chaos Space Marines. Standard stormtrooper equipment is insufficient against traitor Astartes. This was not new information. They logged it anyway. They gave me 3 days rest. Then they assigned me to a new squad. Tempest 12. Different ship, different command structure. 8 members, including me. Sergeant Vorik commanded. He was younger than Harkin. Maybe 30 years old. He looked at my service record and nodded. Said I had combat experience. Said that was valuable. Said I would integrate quickly. The other squad members introduced themselves. I tried to memorize their names. Succeeded partially. Tavin, Roth, others. They asked about my previous assignment. I told them Tempest 7 was eliminated during a Forge World operation. They expressed appropriate condolences. Then we moved to equipment preparation. Stormtroopers do not dwell on casualties. Dwelling reduces efficiency. I performed my duties adequately. trained with the squad, learned their tactical patterns, adapted to Sergeant Vorik's command style. He was competent, not as experienced as Harkin, but adequate. The squad functioned well. Coordination was acceptable, but I could not connect with them. Not the way I had with Corvin. Not the way I had learned to operate with Tempest 7. Every time I looked at Tavern or Roth, I saw Corvin's body disintegrating under bolter fire. Every time Sergeant Vorik gave orders, I heard Harkin's last Vox transmission cut off mid-word. The ghosts of Tempest 7 occupied my thoughts during every moment I was not actively engaged in tactical operations. I tried to suppress these thoughts, failed repeatedly. They persisted as background process. Voices, faces, the smell of Corvin's blood on the meltagun grip. I did not report this to the Medicae. Reporting would result in psychological evaluation. Evaluation might result in reassignment to non-combat duties or medical discharge. I needed to remain operational. Remaining operational was the only thing that gave structure to existence. Without function, I would have only the ghosts. So I performed. I followed orders. I killed when ordered to kill. I advanced when ordered to advance. I maintained my equipment with precise attention to detail. I became outwardly an exemplary stormtrooper. Inwardly, I was becoming something else, something hollowed, a shell that looked like a soldier but felt like absence. Tempest 12 conducted 7 missions over the next 4 months. Standard operations, raids, assassinations, sabotage. We performed adequately. Lost 1 squad member to last gunfire during the 4th mission, received replacement, continued operations. On the 8th mission, we deployed to a death world, orc infestation. Our objective was to eliminate a war boss that had unified several tribes. Intelligence indicated the war boss was sheltering in a crashed Imperial transport ship. We were to breach, kill the war boss, extract. The transport had crashed in jungle terrain. Dense vegetation, ambient temperature 43 degrees, humidity near total. The air was thick. Breathing required conscious effort. We advanced through the jungle in tactical formation. 2 hours to reach the crash site. The orcs had fortified the transport. Crude but effective. Walls constructed from scrap metal. Sentries posted. Perhaps 60 orcs total inside the perimeter. We engaged at dawn. Tempest 12 plus 2 other squads, 24 stormtroopers against 60 orcs. Acceptable odds, we breached the perimeter simultaneously at 3 points. Hellguns cut through the orc sentries. We advanced into the compound. The fighting was brutal. Close quarters. The orcs had heavy weapons, big shooters, rockets. They fired indiscriminately. 1 rocket hit the wall beside me. The explosion killed Roth. Shrapnel caught Tavin in the throat. He bled out in 40 seconds. I applied pressure to the wound. The blood kept coming. His eyes stayed open after he stopped breathing. We pushed deeper into the compound, found the war boss in the transport's command section. Massive creature, 3 meters tall. Augmented with crude cybernetics, it killed 3 stormtroopers with a power cloud before we brought it down. Concentrated hellgun fire. 67 shots, I counted. The war boss fell. We extracted. 12 stormtroopers had entered the compound. 7 emerged. Acceptable casualties. Mission successful, except Tempest 12 had lost 4 members, including Sergeant Vorik. He had been killed by the war boss's power claw. Crushed. His body was not recoverable. Too damaged. We left him there. Command assigned me to a new squad 3 days later. Tempest 19, different ship again. New faces, new names. I memorized them mechanically. Did not attempt connection. There was no purpose in connection. They would die. I would survive. That appeared to be the pattern. The pattern repeated. Tempest 19 deployed to an urban war zone. 8 missions. Lost 5 members. I survived each engagement. Performed adequately, followed orders, killed efficiently. The Medicae examined me after the 5th casualty, asked if I was experiencing psychological distress. I said no. They recorded this and cleared me for continued duty. I was transferred to Tempest 23 after Tempest 19 fell below operational strength. 7 new faces, names I no longer attempted to memorize. Designations were sufficient. Heavy weapons specialist, Vox operator, demolitions expert. Functions, not people. Tempest 23 deployed to a hive world. Chaos cult purge, 6 missions. Lost 4 members. I survived, always survived. I began to understand that something was wrong, not tactically wrong. My performance remained exemplary. My kill count was high. My mission success rate was perfect. But the survival pattern was anomalous. Stormtroopers die. That is operational reality. Survival rates are higher than standard guard infantry, but casualty rates are still significant. Most stormtroopers die within their first year of service. Those who survive become veterans. Veterans have learned to stay alive through skill and experience. But I was not surviving through skill. I was surviving through pattern, through something I could not identify or control. I watched squad mates die beside me, better soldiers than me, more experienced, better shots, better tactical awareness. They died. I lived. The other stormtroopers began to notice. Tempest 23's sergeant pulled me aside after the 4th mission. His name was Macron. He was 34 years old, 16 years of service. He looked at me with an expression I had not seen before. Not quite suspicion, not quite fear, something between. He said other soldiers were talking, saying I was cursed, saying everyone around me died, saying my survival was unnatural. I asked if he believed this. He was silent for 19 seconds. Then he said he believed in tactics and training and the Emperor's will. Whatever was happening, it was not my fault. But perhaps it would be better if I were transferred to a different unit. Perhaps the pattern would break. I was transferred to Tempest 31. The pattern did not break. Tempest 31 deployed to a fortress world. Siege operations. 4 missions. Lost 6 members. I survived. Tempest 38. Jungle Death World. 5 missions. Lost 4 members. I survived. Tempest 42. Hive City Clearance. 3 missions. Lost 5 members. I survived. The reputation spread. Stormtroopers across multiple regiments knew my designation, knew my pattern. They called me the Survivor. Some called me the Curse. Some called me the Ghost. They avoided me in the mess halls, did not speak to me during transport. When I was assigned to a new squad, the other members would look at me with expressions I learned to recognize. Resignation, anger, fear. They knew they would die. I knew they would die. We all knew. But we followed orders anyway because following orders was function, and function was all that remained. Command did not care about superstition. Command cared about operational efficiency. I was efficient. Elite survivor with perfect mission success rate. Valuable asset. They continued assigning me to squads that needed experienced personnel. The squads continued dying. I continued surviving. 17 squads, 4 years of service, 137 missions. Approximate casualty count among my assigned squads, 73 stormtroopers. I survived every single engagement. The faces blur now. The names are mostly gone. I can remember Corvin clearly, can remember Sergeant Harkin, can remember a few others from the early squads. After that, they become categories. Heavy weapons specialist who died on the Hive world. Vox operator who died in the fortress breach. Demolitions expert who triggered his own charges accidentally. I stopped learning names after the 8th squad. Designations only. Functions, it was more efficient. When they died, I logged the casualty type and continued functioning. Process rather than feel. Observe rather than react. Exactly as Sergeant Harkin had demonstrated. I realized at some point that I had become what he had been. Mechanical, clinical, a stormtrooper who no longer processed combat as experience but as data, kill counts, mission parameters, casualty statistics. The human component had eroded systematically over 4 years, until what remained was function without feeling. I also realized this erosion was intentional. The Imperium had not trained me to survive. It had trained me to become an instrument, a weapon that thought. The fact that I continued living while others died was simply resource efficiency. A single experienced stormtrooper could be reassigned indefinitely. Training new soldiers was expensive. Reusing survivors was economical. The curse was not supernatural. It was administrative. I carried this understanding through my 5th year of service, through squads 18, 19, 20, through missions that repeated the same patterns. Insert, engage, kill, extract, count casualties, continue. The ghosts no longer haunted me because I had learned to categorize them as archived data. Memories stored but not accessed. Corvin's face existed in my recall, but I did not process it emotionally. Sergeant Harkin's final transmission was logged but not revisited. The 73 casualties were statistics. I had become efficient. I had become exactly what the Imperium required. I did not know if this was victory or defeat. Squad Assignment 43 came during my 6th year of service. Tempest 67. The designation itself felt meaningless. Numbers assigned to units that would cease to exist within weeks or months. I reported to the briefing chamber aboard the transport designated Relentless Duty. 8 stormtroopers waited. They looked at me when I entered. Their expressions were uniform. Hostility. The squad sergeant was named Valen, 41 years old. 22 years of service, more experienced than any sergeant I had served under since Harkin. He stood when I approached, did not offer greeting. Instead, he said, "You are the curse." Not a question. Statement of fact. "I am Stormtrooper Designation 7743, I said. "Transferred from Tempest 42. Reporting for assignment, I know your designation. I know your record. 149 combat missions. 0 wounds requiring extended medical treatment. Perfect survival rate." He paused. 73 casualties among your assigned squads. "Accurate," I said. "We did not request you. Command assigned you despite our objections. They said we required an experienced operator for the next deployment. They did not care that you kill everyone around you. I follow orders, I complete objectives, my performance evaluations are exemplary. Your survival is unnatural." This came from one of the other squad members. Younger, maybe 24 years old. His name tag read Cortez. "Stormtroopers die. That is operational reality. But you do not die. Everyone else dies. You walk out. Every time." "Yes," I said. There was no point denying observable data. "Then you are cursed. You bring death. The Emperor has marked you." I looked at Cortez. He believed what he was saying. They all believed it. Not superstition. Rational assessment of pattern data. 73 casualties. 1 survivor. Statistically anomalous. Therefore cursed. "I do not control who lives or dies during operations," I said. "I perform my function. I follow tactical doctrine. If my presence is unacceptable, request transfer to command." Sergeant Valen shook his head. "Command will not approve transfer. They consider you valuable, elite survivor. They will continue assigning you to squads that need experience. You will continue surviving. We will continue dying. Then what do you propose?" He was silent for 11 seconds. Then he said, "We will attempt to survive despite you. We will maintain maximum tactical distance during operations. We will not rely on your support. We will treat you as independent operator rather than squad member. Perhaps that will break the pattern." "Acceptable," I said. It was not acceptable. Tactical doctrine required squad cohesion. Treating a member as independent operator reduced coordination and efficiency. But I understood their logic. They believed isolation might protect them from whatever killed stormtroopers near me. They were wrong. But I did not tell them this. They would learn. We deployed 6 days later to a shrine world designated Morton's Reach. Heretic uprising. A cardinal had been assassinated by cultists. The local ecclesiarchy demanded retribution. 3 stormtrooper squads assigned. Our objective was a temple complex where cult leadership was sheltering. Standard surgical strike. Eliminate high-value targets. Extract. Tempest 67 maintained their isolation protocol during the insertion. They deployed in tight formation. I deployed separately, 20 meters to their flank. We advanced through the Shrine World's sacred districts in parallel paths. They communicated via Squad VoxNet. I was excluded. I operated on command frequency only, receiving orders from the mission controller but not participating in squad-level coordination. This was inefficient. But I adapted. I had learned to adapt to every squad's dysfunction. This was simply another variation. We reached the temple complex at dawn. The structure was ancient, pre-imperial construction, consecrated during the Great Crusade, marble pillars, gold leaf inscriptions, statuary depicting saints whose names were lost to time. The heretics had desecrated everything. Graffiti, iconography of chaos gods, bloodstains on the sacred marble. We breached through the primary entrance, 2 squads as frontal assault. Tempest 67. Including me as flanking element. The engagement began immediately. The cultists had fortified the temple interior, perhaps 100 hostiles, armed with autoguns, improvised explosives, faith in their dark gods. They fought with the desperation of believers who knew they would not be permitted to surrender. We killed them methodically, room by room, corridor by corridor. My hellgun fired in controlled bursts. Each trigger pull had become mechanical. Target acquisition, sight alignment, fire. Next target. I had fired hellguns approximately 47,000 times during my service. The weapon was extension of body. Killing was motor function, not conscious decision. Tempest 67 advanced through the temple's southern section. I advanced through the eastern section. Parallel operations. We were clearing toward the central sanctuary, where intelligence indicated cult leadership was located. My sector had lighter resistance. I encountered perhaps 20 cultists. Eliminated them with efficient fire discipline. 0 ammunition wasted. I reached the sanctuary entrance 4 minutes before Tempest 67. The doors were sealed. I placed breaching charges, prepared for detonation. Then I heard the vox chatter from Tempest 67's channel. I was not supposed to monitor their frequency, but I had kept passive listening active. Habit from previous squads. They had encountered heavy resistance. Pinned down in a corridor approach, taking casualties. Sergeant Valen transmitted request for support. Command ordered me to divert to their position. I had a choice in that moment. Follow orders and support the squad. Or detonate the breaching charges, complete my assigned objective, let Tempest 67 handle their engagement independently. Following orders would expose me to the same resistance that was killing them, would place me in direct combat alongside squad members who hated me, who believed I was cursed, who would die anyway because that was the pattern. Completing my objective would advance the mission, would eliminate cult leadership faster, would potentially reduce overall casualties by removing enemy command structure. Tactically sound decision. I followed orders. I diverted to Tempest 67's position. Approached from their rear. The corridor they were pinned in was narrow, perhaps 3 meters wide. The cultists had established a defensive position with heavy stubbers and improvised barricades. Tempest 67 was trapped in a kill zone. They had already lost 2 members. I could see the bodies. Cortez was one of them. Half his head was gone. Heavy stubber round. I flanked the cultist position through a service passage, emerged behind their defensive line, fired into their rear, killed 6 cultists before they could reorient, threw a frag grenade into their barricade. The explosion killed 4 more. The survivors attempted to retreat. Tempest 67's remaining members advanced, caught them in crossfire, eliminated them. The corridor became silent except for the ringing in my ears and the sound of my own breathing. Sergeant Valen approached me. His face was covered in blood. Not his blood. Spatter from the cultists. He looked at me for 8 seconds. You saved us, he said. I followed orders. Command directed me to support your position. You could have ignored orders, could have completed your objective. Let us die. Nobody would have questioned it. Combat chaos. Communication breakdown. Standard operational explanations. Yes, I said, I could have, but you did not. You chose to help. I processed this observation. He was correct. I had made a choice. Not the tactically optimal choice. Not the choice that followed pattern. I had chosen to attempt saving squad members who despised me, who believed I was cursed, who would likely die anyway during future operations. I did not understand why I had made that choice, but I had. And 2 members of Tempest 67 were alive because of it. Cortez was dead. Another, whose name I had not memorized, was dead. But 6 others survived. The pattern had not broken. It had simply adjusted variables. We completed the mission, breached the sanctuary, eliminated cult leadership, extracted with moderate casualties. Command classified the operation as successful. Tempest 67 had lost 2 members, acceptable losses. They received replacements within the week. Sergeant Valen spoke to me 3 days after the mission, private conversation in the armory while I was performing weapon maintenance. He said the squad had discussed my actions. They had agreed that perhaps I was not cursed. Perhaps I was simply unlucky. Perhaps the pattern was coincidence magnified by confirmation bias and superstition. I told him the pattern was not coincidence. 73 casualties across 17 squads. Statistical analysis indicated significant deviation from expected survival rates. Something was causing the anomaly. I simply did not know what. He asked if I believed the Emperor had marked me, if divine will was keeping me alive while others died. I said I did not know what the Emperor wanted. I did not know if the Emperor noticed individual stormtroopers. The scale of the Imperium was vast. Billions died daily. My survival was not significant enough to warrant divine attention. Then why do you survive? Balin asked. I do not know, I said. This was truth. I follow doctrine. I maintain equipment properly. I make tactically sound decisions, but many soldiers do the same and die anyway. I survive. I cannot explain why. Perhaps you survive because you are supposed to survive. Perhaps the Emperor requires you to witness, to remember, to carry the weight of those who fall. I considered this interpretation. It was theological rather than tactical, assigning meaning to pattern, finding purpose in random distribution of death. Humans required meaning. The universe did not provide it. So they created it. Perhaps, I said, non-committal. I did not believe divine will controlled who lived or died, but I could not prove otherwise. And if believing I was marked for witnessing helped Valen accept my presence, belief served tactical purpose. He nodded. Then witness well. Remember their names. Honor their service. He left me in the armory. I sat there for 43 minutes after he departed, holding my hell gun. Performing maintenance rituals I had performed thousands of times. The weapon was clean, functionally perfect. I was maintaining it because maintenance was ritual, because ritual was structure, because structure prevented thinking about the choice I had made in that corridor. I had chosen to save them, not because orders required it. Orders had required support, but I could have interpreted that flexibly. I had chosen to save them because some part of me that still remembered being human had wanted them to live. That realization was uncomfortable. I had spent 4 years systematically eliminating emotional response to combat, processing death as data, surviving by becoming mechanical. But in that corridor, facing choice, something had emerged that was not mechanical. Something that had decided 2 stormtroopers I barely knew were worth risking my life for. I did not know if this emergence was progress or regression. I did not know if remaining human was compatible with surviving. I filed the question as unresolved and continued weapon maintenance. Tempest 67 deployed on 4 more missions over the next 2 months. Standard operations, raids, elimination targets we performed adequately. Lost one member during the third mission. Received replacement. The squad's treatment of me had changed. Not acceptance exactly, but acknowledgement. They spoke to me during planning, included me in tactical discussions. Sergeant Valen assigned me critical positions during assaults. I remained isolated by choice. Did not participate in the informal conversations during downtime. Did not share personal history. Did not form connections beyond tactical coordination. The ghosts of 73 casualties had taught me that connection was liability. Corvin's face remained clearest in my memory because he had been closest to connection. Everyone after him was intentionally blurred, protecting myself through emotional distance. But Tempest 67 was different. They were attempting to integrate me despite the pattern, despite the curse. Sergeant Valen's theological interpretation had given them framework to accept my presence. I was witness, marked by the Emperor to remember. My survival had purpose beyond random chance. I did not believe this, but they did, and their belief was changing how they operated around me. They took fewer risks, maintained better discipline, checked equipment more thoroughly, as if my presence reminded them that death was always proximate, that survival required vigilance. Their casualty rate was lower than previous squads I had served with, statistically significant deviation. 1 death in 5 missions instead of 4 or 5 deaths. The pattern was adjusting. Or perhaps I was simply noticing because I was beginning to care whether they lived or died. That realization came during the 6th mission. We deployed to an agri-world. Orc raiders were attacking food production facilities. Our objective was to eliminate an orc warband that had fortified a distribution center. 8 stormtroopers against approximately 40 orcs. Acceptable odds if we maintained tactical superiority. The assault went badly from the start. The orcs had heavier weapons than intelligence had indicated. They had looted Imperial equipment from a destroyed Guard regiment. Autocannons, heavy bolters, actual coordinated defensive positions instead of the typical orc disorganization. We took casualties immediately. The heavy weapons specialist, his name was Gant, I had learned it 3 days prior, was hit by autocannon fire. The rounds tore through his armor. His body came apart. I saw it happen from 15 meters away. Saw the moment of impact. Saw the biological matter that had been a person become scattered components. I felt something, not the clinical observation I had trained myself toward. Actual emotion. Grief. Anger. Gant had spoken to me the previous evening about his brother who served in the Guard. He had shown me a picked capture. 2 young men smiling. The pict was damaged. Gant had carried it for 6 years. He had asked if I had family. I had said no. He had nodded and said all stormtroopers were family then. Said the squad was all that mattered. Now he was dead. The picked capture was still in his equipment. His brother would never know what happened. The Munitorum would send standard notification. Gant would become casualty statistic. Forgotten, unless someone remembered. I advanced through the orc fire, threw a crack grenade into the autocannon position. The explosion destroyed the weapon. I fired my Hellgun into the orc crew. Killed 3 of them. The rest of the squad advanced behind me. We pushed through the orc defensive line. Sergeant Valen directed fire with precise commands. We cleared the facility room by room. 27 orcs dead. 6 stormtroopers survived. Gant and 1 other, Marcus, were casualties. Acceptable losses. Mission successful. I retrieved Gant's picked capture from his body before the recovery servitors arrived. Kept it. Did not report this to command. Personal effects were supposed to be processed through official channels, but I took it anyway, because he had shown it to me, because he had said stormtroopers were family, because someone needed to remember he had existed beyond casualty report entry. This was deviation from protocol. This was connection. This was becoming human again in ways that would make survival more difficult. I did not care. Something had changed during that mission. The mechanical efficiency I had cultivated for 4 years was cracking. Gant's death had mattered to me, not as data point, as loss. I processed this change over the following days, attempted to understand what had shifted, concluded that Tempest 67's acceptance had eroded my defensive isolation. They had treated me as squad member rather than curse, had included me, had spoken to me as person rather than function. And I had responded by becoming person again. This was dangerous. Being person meant feeling. Feeling meant attachment. Attachment meant grief when they died. And they would die. The pattern remained. I survived. Others did not. But perhaps surviving alone was worse than surviving with grief. Perhaps carrying the weight of memory was the actual function. Perhaps Sergeant Valen's theological interpretation had been correct. I was supposed to witness, to remember, to testify that these soldiers had existed and fought and died. I did not know if this purpose was sufficient, but it was the only purpose I could find. Tempest 67 deployed on 3 more missions, lost 1 additional member, received replacement. The replacement was named Sorel, 19 years old. First assignment after training. He was frightened but hid it adequately behind discipline. He asked me questions during equipment preparation. How long had I served? How many missions? What advice I had for first combat? I told him to follow Sergeant Valen's orders exactly, to maintain his equipment obsessively, to trust his training, to accept that death was possible but not inevitable, to remember that other stormtroopers relied on him, to not waste his life but also not hesitate when action was required. He listened carefully, nodded, thanked me, said he had heard stories about me, about the curse. But Sergeant Valen had told him the stories were exaggeration. That I was experienced operator who had been unlucky with squad assignments. That I was not cursed, just survivor. I did not correct this interpretation. Let him believe what helped him function. We deployed to a hive world 4 days later. The mission was target assassination. A heretic demagogue was organizing resistance in the lower hive sections. Our objective was to eliminate him and his primary lieutenants. Intelligence indicated light security. Standard insertion, execution, extraction. Intelligence was incorrect. Again. The target was protected by corrupted Arbites. 50 of them. Former law enforcement turned traitor. They had military-grade equipment and training. The engagement was supposed to be surgical strike. It became prolonged firefight. We were pinned in a hab structure. 3 floors. The Arbites surrounded the building, poured fire into every entrance. We returned fire from defensive positions, but we were outnumbered 7-1. Casualties accumulated. Sorel died in the first 6 minutes. Shotgun blast through a window. He was standing too close. The spread caught him across the chest. His armor stopped most of it, but several pellets penetrated. One hit his throat. He bled out while I applied pressure to the wound. His eyes stayed on my face. He tried to speak. Could not. His blood covered my hands. Warm. Copper smell. His body stopped moving after 93 seconds. He had been 19 years old. 4 days with the squad. I had known his name, had spoken to him, had tried to help him survive. He died anyway. The mechanical part of my mind logged this as expected outcome. Stormtroopers die. This is operational reality. The human part that had been re-emerging felt something different. Guilt. If I had told him to stand elsewhere, if I had positioned differently, if the curse was real and my presence had killed him, I did not have time to process these thoughts. The Arbites were advancing. We needed to break the siege or we would all die here. Sergeant Valen ordered fighting retreat to the upper floors. We complied. 3 squad members had been killed. 5 of us remained. We climbed to the 3rd floor, barricaded the stairwell. The Arbites followed. We heard them clearing the lower floors. Methodical, professional. They were not rushing. They knew we were trapped. Valen accessed the Vox. Transmitted situation report to command. Requested immediate extraction. Command responded that extraction was not possible. Airspace was contested. Nearest support was 40 minutes away. We needed to hold position. 40 minutes was not possible. The Arbites would breach the third floor within 10 minutes. We did not have sufficient ammunition for sustained defense. We were going to die here. I understood this with clinical clarity. The pattern was repeating. The squad would be eliminated. I would survive, somehow, through whatever mechanism had preserved me through 17 previous squad eliminations. But this time, I did not want to survive alone. This time I wanted the pattern to break. I told Sergeant Valen I had a proposal. He listened. I explained that the Arbites were advancing methodically because they believed we were trapped. If we broke their siege unexpectedly, created chaos, we might escape through the confusion. I proposed we rig the third floor with all our remaining explosives, detonate it while we descended through the building's exterior, rappel down the outside wall while the Arbites were focused on the internal explosion. It was desperate. Low probability of success, but higher probability than waiting for extraction that would not arrive in time. Valen considered for 11 seconds, then nodded. Do it. Frag grenades, crack charges, demo packs, set them with 10-minute delay. Then we breached through the exterior wall on the third floor's western side, used grapple lines to rappel down. The descent was fast, uncontrolled. We hit the ground with impacts that would have broken unaugmented human bones. The explosives detonated while we were running. The third floor collapsed, the structure's upper section pancaked down, dust and debris filled the air. The Arbites' formation broke, confusion exactly as predicted. We ran through the chaos, reached the extraction coordinates 6 blocks away. The Valkyrie was waiting. We boarded, lifted off while the Arbites were still organizing response to the building collapse. All 5 of us survived. 0 casualties during the extraction. The pattern had broken. Partially, the squad had not been eliminated. I had not been sole survivor. We had all escaped together. Sergeant Valen looked at me during the flight back to base, said nothing, but his expression conveyed something. Perhaps gratitude. Perhaps respect, perhaps recognition that I had chosen survival for the squad rather than survival for myself. I did not know if the pattern had actually broken or if this was statistical anomaly within broader pattern. 76 casualties across previous operations. 5 survivors this time. Sample size too small to determine significance, but it felt different, felt like the curse had bent, not broken, but bent. We returned to base. Debriefed. Command classified the mission as partial success. Target not eliminated, but squad survived against overwhelming odds. Tactical ingenuity commended. Sergeant Valen received formal recognition. He stated in his report that my tactical proposal had saved the squad. Command logged this. I sat in my quarters that evening, cleaned my equipment, standard ritual, but my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from something else. Relief, perhaps, or delayed stress response. The adrenaline that had sustained me through the siege was metabolizing out of my system, leaving me with awareness of how close we had come to complete elimination. Leaving me with awareness that I had cared, that I had wanted them to survive, that their survival had mattered more than maintaining emotional isolation. The ghosts were still there. 76 casualties. Corvin, Gant, Sorrel, all the others whose names I had tried not to learn. But they were quieter now, not tormenting, just present, witnesses to what I had become, what I was still becoming. I looked at Gant's picked capture. 2 brothers smiling. One of them was dead now. The other would never know the details, would only receive notification, would grieve and continue serving. The Imperium did not pause for individual grief, but I would remember. I would carry Gant's memory, and Sorrel's, and all the others, because that was the only thing I could do for them, the only testimony I could provide. I did not know if this was sufficient purpose, but it was purpose, and purpose was all that separated existence from mere continuation. Tempest 67 deployed on 7 more missions over the next 4 months. We lost 3 additional members during that period, received replacements, continued operations. The pattern had not broken entirely. Stormtroopers still died, but the casualty rate remained lower than my previous squads. We functioned with unusual cohesion. Sergeant Valen attributed this to the squad's experience and discipline. Perhaps he was correct. Or perhaps the curse was evolving, learning, adjusting variables to produce different outcomes. I was assigned to a medical isolation cell after the 19th mission with Tempest 67. Not injury, exhaustion. The Medicae said my stress hormone levels were dangerously elevated, that I required 72 hours of enforced rest or I would experience systemic breakdown. I did not argue. I was too tired to argue. The isolation cell was 2 meters by 3 meters. A cot, a waste disposal unit, a single lumen in the ceiling. They did not provide sedatives, said my body needed to process the stress naturally. Said sleep would come if I stopped resisting it. They were wrong. Sleep did not come. I lay on the cot in the isolation cell and stared at the ceiling. The silence was absolute. No machinery hum, no vox chatter, no weapons fire. Just my breathing and the sound of my heart beating in my ears. Without external stimuli, my mind had nothing to process except memory. The ghosts emerged fully. Not metaphorical ghosts, actual detailed memories of every death I had witnessed. Corvin's body disintegrating, Kellen's torso separating, Gant torn apart by autocannon fire, Sorel bleeding out while staring at my face. 76 faces, 76 deaths, 76 moments where I had been present and unable to prevent. I tried to count to suppress the memories. 1, 2, 3, 4. Rhythm, pattern, something to focus on. Reached 347, the memories persisted. I tried to recite tactical doctrine, equipment specifications, mission parameters, technical data, anything to occupy consciousness. The data recited correctly, but the memories remained underneath. Background process that would not terminate. I tried to pray. The chaplains had taught us prayers during training. Words to invoke the Emperor's protection. I spoke them aloud in the isolation cell. The words felt hollow, ritual without meaning. If the Emperor protected, why had 76 stormtroopers died? Why had I survived? If divine will controlled outcomes, the will was arbitrary and cruel. I stopped praying, lay in silence, let the memories process without resistance. This was what consciousness did when alone with itself. It reviewed, it analyzed, it attempted to find meaning in data that had no meaning. 76 deaths were not lesson or punishment or divine plan. They were operational outcome, statistical distribution, random variables in complex system. But humans required meaning, could not accept randomness, so they created patterns, curses, divine marking. Theological purpose, anything to transform random death into comprehensible narrative. I understood this intellectually, but understanding did not prevent my mind from seeking pattern anyway, from asking why I survived, from wondering if Sergeant Valen was correct, if I was supposed to witness, if my survival had purpose beyond chance. I did not find answers in the isolation cell, only more questions. Questions that cycled recursively. Why did I survive? Why did they die? Was survival blessing or punishment? Was witnessing sufficient purpose? Did memory honor the dead or simply prolong my own suffering? The 72 hours passed slowly. Time became elastic. Hours felt like days. I drifted between consciousness and something that was not quite sleep. Fragments of dreams, Corvin speaking words I could not hear. Gant showing me the picked capture again. Sorel asking what advice I had for first combat. All of them looking at me. Waiting. For what? For testimony? For remembrance? For meaning I could not provide? When they released me from isolation, I had not slept, had not found answers, had only processed memory until memory became abstract, distant, archived. The Medicae cleared me for duty, said my stress levels had normalized, said isolation had been therapeutic. I did not correct them. Therapeutic implied healing. I had not healed. I had simply learned to carry the weight more efficiently. I returned to Tempest 67. They asked if I was well. I said yes. We deployed 3 days later. The next 6 missions blurred together. Standard operations. I performed my function, followed orders, killed when required. The squad lost 2 more members. I learned their names, remembered their faces, added them to the archive. 78 casualties total now, across 19 squads, 6 years of service, 173 combat missions. I was 25 years old. I had killed approximately 3,700 enemy combatants. These numbers were logged in my service record. Quantified experience, data points that summarized existence. But the numbers did not capture what service had cost. Did not measure the erosion of whatever had made me human at 19. Did not account for the weight of 78 memories carried as permanent burden. The numbers said I was elite stormtrooper, experienced, valuable. The numbers did not say I was becoming something that looked like soldier but felt like archive. Walking collection of ghosts, consciousness that existed primarily to remember the dead. I realized during Mission 174 that I had stopped caring whether I survived. Not suicidal, not deliberately reckless, just absent the survival instinct that motivated most soldiers. I performed my function adequately, but I no longer feared death. Death would be rest, release from carrying memory. The ghosts would finally stop. But I continued surviving anyway. The pattern held. Mission 174, 175, 176. Tempest 67 lost 3 more members. I archived them with the others. Sergeant Valen noticed my degradation, pulled me aside after Mission 177, asked if I needed to request medical evaluation. I said no. He said I was functioning adequately, but something had changed. My performance remained exemplary, but I seemed absent, detached beyond normal stormtrooper emotional control. I told him I was processing accumulated experience, that 6 years of continuous combat created cognitive burden, that I was managing adequately. He looked at me for 19 seconds. Then he said if I needed to talk, he was available. I thanked him, did not take him up on the offer. There was nothing to discuss. The pattern was clear. The outcome was determined. Talking would not change variables. We deployed on Mission 178. Hive World. Chaos Cult. Standard elimination operation. The mission was supposed to be routine. Nothing was routine. The cult had demonic support, actual warp entities manifesting in real space. Command had not known this was possible. The intelligence was wrong again. It was always wrong. 3 stormtrooper squads deployed. 24 elite soldiers. The Daemons killed 19 of them in 7 minutes. I watched it happen. Watched reality break. Watched creatures that should not exist tear through armor and flesh like neither offered resistance. Watched stormtroopers who had survived dozens of missions die screaming. Tempest 67 was eliminated. All 8 members, Sergeant Valen died trying to provide cover for retreat. The Daemon caught him, pulled him apart. His last Vox transmission was prayer to the Emperor. The prayer did not save him. I survived, I do not know how. The Daemon moved past me, did not acknowledge my presence. Perhaps it did not see me. Perhaps I was beneath notice. Perhaps the curse extended even to warp entities. 5 stormtroopers survived from 24. We extracted. Mission was classified as catastrophic failure. Command logged casualty reports. Issued new assignments. The Imperium continued functioning. I sat in my quarters aboard the transport ship. Processed what had happened. Tempest 67 was gone. Sergeant Valen, who had tried to integrate me, who had created theological framework to accept my survival, who had treated me as person rather than curse, dead along with everyone else. 86 casualties now, across 20 squads. The pattern had not broken, had only pretended to break, to give me hope that things could be different, then had returned with full force. I understood something in that moment. The curse was not supernatural. It was not divine judgment. It was simply mathematics. Operational reality expressed through my continued existence. Stormtroopers die. That is function. The Imperium consumes soldiers at rates that make individual survival statistically improbable. I was not marked by the Emperor. I was simply an anomalous data point in probability distribution. Outlier who survived through random chance, repeated 178 times. Or perhaps I survived because some part of me had learned to become invisible to death, had learned to exist without presence, to be functional without being noticed, to perform soldier rituals while remaining absent from actual experience. The curse was dissociation weaponized. I did not know if this understanding helped. It simply was. Data processed. Pattern recognized. Meaning extracted. Command assigned me to a new squad 2 days later. Tempest 89. Different ship. New faces. They looked at me with the familiar expression: hostility, fear, resignation. They knew who I was. What I represented. They knew they would die. I knew they would die. The pattern was clear. I reported for duty anyway. Because reporting was function. Because I had no alternative. Because the Imperium did not permit stormtroopers to resign. Service continued until death or incapacitation. I was not dead. I was not incapacitated. Therefore, I served. The squad sergeant was named Helric, 29 years old, 11 years of service. He looked at me during the briefing and said, "You are the survivor. Yes, you have been assigned to my squad despite my objections. Command said you are elite operator with extensive experience. They did not mention that you kill everyone around you. I do not kill them. Combat kills them. I am present when combat occurs. Correlation is not causation. Correlation that repeats 86 times becomes pattern. Yes, it becomes pattern, but I do not control the pattern. I simply exist within it. And now we are cursed by association." I did not argue. Argument would not change his assessment. I simply nodded and prepared my equipment. We deployed 4 days later.